All right, I've held off long enough. It's time to give you guys my favorite movies of all time. What is up, Flick fans? Welcome back to my channel. I have been preaching this for so long now, telling you guys my favorite movies of all time video is coming. I promise, it's coming. And finally, I'm going to give you guys what I believe to be my personal top movies of all time. Now, the reason I distinguish favorite and best is because I'm not giving you a list of the movies I would consider to be the most high quality or the most well-received, right? These are my personal favorites. And of course I factor that in, but you also have to take into account nostalgia. You have to take into account how many times you've watched a particular movie, whether you grew up with that film or not. So I feel like my list is going to separate itself from so many lists you've seen on YouTube, because a lot of the YouTubers that I follow and I am subscribed to, they are a bit older, therefore they hold different movies than me in higher regard. And I'll still include some of those, absolutely. We have our fair share of classics. But we also have Austin's fair share of what he considers to be his personal classics. So this list will be different, but this isn't the actual top 30. So the top 30 is coming tomorrow. And if you guys enjoy this video, be sure to hit that notification bell and smash that thumbs up button. We'll definitely do more things like this, but stay tuned, because that's the big one. But I did want to give you guys some honorable mentions. These are the films that we're about to talk about that got so close to making my top 30 list. These are still movies that I love, and even if I don't believe some of them are the best movies ever made, yeah, I mean, they're still the films that mean the most to me personally. So your lists will be a lot different from my lists, so I need your lists down below. You guys know me. I'm a superhero guy. I love me some good animated films, so they're going to be on here. Get yourself prepped if you're not a superhero fan. And we are actually going to do this by genre, right? I don't have these honorable mentions in order. I will do that a bit later on Letterboxd. So if you're following me on Letterboxd, you will see my full top 50, 55 movies of all time. We're going to do this by genre. And we're going to start with the one that everyone loves, in the superhero genre. So here are the superhero movies that came very close to making my top 30 of all time. And let's start with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2, a film that is the epitome, it's the embodiment of nostalgia for me. I watched this film so many times growing up. It came out in 2004, and that's prime time for a 9-year-old Austin to fall in love, even more so, with superheroes. I was already a huge comic book reader, and Spider-Man, one of my favorite heroes from the comics. I love this movie so much. Not going to say where it ranks in my Spider-Man films, but it's easily the best of that trilogy. It's one that resonated with me. It does have its fair share of cheese, so in terms of quality, I wouldn't put it up there with the Dark Knights and the Logans of the world, but I still love it. I think Doc Ock is one of the best villains of all time, and Tobey Maguire, I mean, it's a bit cheesy at times, but it works really well for me. The next film I'm talking about is Captain America: Civil War, another superhero movie that got so close to being in my top 30. You guys know me. I'm a big Russo brothers fan. I'm obviously the biggest fan of Captain America, and his entire trilogy just resonates so well with me. This is a film that stuck out in every way possible, whether it's introducing us to heroes like Spider-Man and Black Panther for the first time, giving us the airport battle, which is one of the coolest battles I've ever seen on screen, or the impeccable direction by the Russo brothers. And you may say, well, it's a bit too much green screen. It's a bit too much this and that. I understand that to a degree, but I believe this is one of the more underrated villains of all time. In Zemo, I love how he tore the team apart from the inside. And this film is just one of those Marvel movies that will resonate with me forever. Now, here's the kicker. Avengers Infinity War somehow, and this one got really close. I'll cheat and tell you guys that this was right outside my top 30. Somehow didn't make my top 30, but it's still one of my favorite superhero movies of all time. It did everything we wanted it to do. It was the culmination of the Avengers and the Guardians, but the best part about the film was that it was Thanos' movie. It was being told from his perspective. Now, I have yet to watch these two movies in order. I either watch Infinity War and Endgame on separate days, but I need to do a big binge sesh one of these days. Regardless, one of the coolest blockbusters to come out in my time, and nothing will ever... Okay, only a few things top that theater experience, man. One of the coolest I've ever had. Then we're going to go from superheroes to a team, a group of people that are almost superhero-like in nature. and that is the Inglorious Basterds. It's a cast that is ridiculously rich in talent. Brad Pitt giving one of his most impressive performances to date. Christoph Waltz. It's always a toss-up between this and Django. It's like, I don't know what I prefer him in, but he's incredible. And this is one of those movies that you have to go back and watch multiple times. So I rewatched this recently just to see if this could crack my top 30. And while it didn't crack my top 30, it did actually move up my Tarantino list. I now have this above Pulp Fiction. Austin, what are you doing? Pulp Fiction's a classic. Yes, but once again, I grew up more so with Inglorious Basterds, and it's one that I have watched over and over, and I feel like every time I see it, the more I get out of it, and that's the beauty of a good Tarantino film. So Inglorious Basterds, absolutely incredible. We're going to go from Tarantino to Rian Johnson, Looper. I'm a massive fan. A couple of things within the movie are not explained maybe to the best of their ability, but I believe this is one of the definitive sci-fi movies of the last decade. You have Joseph Gordon-Levitt playing a brilliant young Bruce Willis, and Bruce Willis giving us a great performance. It's one of the few he has given over the last 10 plus 20 years. And it's just one of those movies, the ending broke my heart in every way possible, and I love what's going on with the kids. So a lot of sci-fi elements, not just time travel within Looper, and it's so cool. And it was easily my favorite movie of 2012, right? Not necessarily, because we're going right back to Quentin Tarantino. I probably should have done Tarantino after Tarantino, but this is more appealing to me. Django was on my top 30 list for quite some time, and it recently fell off. And I say fell off, listen, all of these movies, obviously my favorites of all time. So just because they didn't crack tomorrow's list, they're still incredible. And Django is one of the coolest theater experiences because, to be flat honest with you, I wasn't expecting to have as much fun with this movie as I ended up having. I wasn't expecting this much gore and just pure madness. I mean, we got that in Inglorious Basterds, but Django is the kind of movie that you want to watch in a theater. I think Jamie Foxx's performance is awesome. Christoph Waltz, like I said, and then you have actors like Leonardo DiCaprio and Samuel L. Jackson, and everyone is phenomenal, and everyone does exactly what they need to do to provide 2.5 hours of some of the best movie watching I've ever had in the theater. And like I said, it's really hard not to put this in my top 30. It is my favorite Tarantino movie. I know it's a bit different from a lot of people, but I love it so much. Another movie that I love, 4 years later, 4 years ago, right in the middle of this in Django, Hell or High Water. We're going from Western to Western. And Hell or High Water is just one of those movies that I haven't stopped thinking about since I first saw it in the theater way back when. Now, it wasn't my favorite movie of that year, because we have some above it that will be on tomorrow's list. But it is a film that I believe is one of the greatest examples of how you do a modern Western. And Ben Foster's performance, Jeff Bridges, phenomenal. Jeff Bridges. Chris Pine is awesome. This may be my favorite role of his to date. But Ben Foster broke my heart, stole my heart, ripped it apart in this movie, and it's just so real. It reminds me of another film we're going to talk about tomorrow, which is another Western. You can probably guess what that is, but it's the closest I felt to that film since seeing that film, and it's one of the more impactful experiences I've ever had in the theater. David Mackenzie's direction, Taylor Sheridan's writing, it all came together in such a beautiful way. And if you're a fan of Westerns and you've never seen Hell or High Water from 2016, please go check it out. Everyone I recommended this movie to has enjoyed it. We're talking the more casual audience, so I think you guys will like it. And the next film, another one that it breaks my heart, it didn't make my top 30, is Seven. This is David Fincher at the top of his game, man. Not my favorite David Fincher movie, but in terms of where he was in 1995, combining Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt and giving us one of the most integral mysteries of our time, one of the most interesting crime, dramatic, thrilling movies, and the intensity just through the dialogue in Seven is fantastic. And this has to be one of my favorite screenplays I've ever seen, and one of the most impactful third acts I've ever seen. So Seven is one of those movies. If you're a fan of David Fincher, this is one you have to watch. It's the closest I feel to Mindhunter, what David Fincher is bringing us now. Then we have Christopher Nolan, and well, you'll see more of him on this list, Christopher Nolan's Memento. Now, Memento is known as just kind of the defining movie from Nolan, the way that he weaves together this story. You're going backwards, you're going forwards through time, and the movie kind of meets in the middle. And the way that Nolan distinguishes this is through color and black and white. You guys know the story if you've seen the movie, but if you haven't seen the film, I urge you. First of all, Guy Pearce, where has this Guy Pearce been? But what Nolan did with this film is almost unfathomable, and I can't begin to describe the feeling I had the first time I watched it. I'm like, what? Then I watch it again, I'm like, starting to understand more. And then you keep watching, and just like, Memento is finally coming together. And those are the movies that stick with you. And that's why I believe Memento is one of Nolan's best. Okay, we're getting ridiculous. There's no transition here. You can't just go from Memento to Elf. Listen, it's my favorite movies of all time, okay? And this is my Christmas movie. Elf is the definitive Christmas film, and it is indeed an honorable mention of mine. I love it. I watch it every year. I can't help it. Is it the most well-made movie you've ever seen? No. Look, and I'm not going to say it is necessarily the best quality Christmas film, but I love the antics. I love the ridiculousness. I can quote the entire film, and those are the movies, the ones that you hold close to your heart, that you build that nostalgia for, but they still hold up when you're older. Those are the movies that make your all-time list, and Elf is one of those for me. We go from Elf to Anchorman. Oh my goodness. Now, I will say this. I was between Anchorman and Dumb and Dumber for this honorable mentions list because both of those movies are two of my favorite comedies of all time. I put Anchorman on here, but I'm going to give an honorable mention in the honorable mentions to Dumb and Dumber. It was very close. The only reason I put Anchorman is because it just combines the best of everything I love about comedy. The antics, the ridiculousness, the fact that you have all of these incredible actors, and maybe we didn't even know it at the time, but Paul Rudd and Steve Carell and Will Ferrell, and it's perfect. When you look at how a comedy is supposed to be structured, and sure, there are flaws within the story. It's not a perfect movie, hence the lower rating. But in terms of where it resonates with me and where it lies in my heart, I had to put it on my favorites list because I go back to it so often. One of the most rewatchable comedies I've ever seen. Speaking of rewatchable, Shaun of the Dead is a great comedy. It is hilarious, like an Anchorman, but it's a better movie than Anchorman. I love the British dry humor, but I also just love how they're playing on the zombie genre, and they're dealing with tropes that I didn't even know were tropes back in 2004. Like, we get these zombie movies now, it's like, oh, we've seen this 1,000 times. You go back and you watch Shaun of the Dead, you're like, it somehow told the future. It knew that this would become something that it could make fun of. These, we're going to pay attention to these detail moments within all three of these movies. I mean, The World's End and Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead, all three of those films I love. But my favorite is Shaun of the Dead. And we have apes together strong. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Oh my goodness. This is just, it's a scary one to go back and rewatch right now with what's happening in the world. But it is just, it's a movie that I believe handles what the source material gave us from the old films. And not to say that I don't like the older films, but I don't really hold them in high regard. You watch something like this to me is what you can do with this concept. This, to me, is the definitive Planet of the Apes trilogy. I love all three movies. The standout for me is Dawn. I believe it is the Empire Strikes Back, the Dark Knight of that trilogy. Got very close to being in my top 30. It was right there. And Andy Serkis's performance as Caesar. But what happens with Koba? I mean, Koba is what puts this over the top. One of the best villains I've ever seen. Terminator 2 Judgment Day, another sci-fi film dealing with the apocalyptic elements that I love. Terminator 2 Judgment Day, it's really hard not putting this up there because I just think it's almost the perfect sci-fi action movie. The only reason I didn't place it in that top 30 is because I have more films that resonate with me just a tad bit more, but there's no denying the impact and the power behind Terminator. Arnold's performance in this movie is freaking outstanding, man, but it's just the storyline and everything that the other Terminator movies have gotten wrong since. This movie perfected, it got right, and it's probably, it's definitely my favorite James Cameron movie. I think it is almost a perfect sci-fi film. Speaking of perfect sci-fi, and I know this one's a bit divisive today, which is crazy. 2001: A Space Odyssey. You either love this movie or you hate this movie. I rewatched this the other day just to make sure it was in my honorable mentions, and it absolutely is. This is an experience. The fact that this holds up today, what Kubrick did was astounding at the time. This film looks so much better than other movies that we get in 2020. It's ridiculous. The fact that they went to him and thought that he staged the moon landing, that should tell you, that should show you the power behind a movie like 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it holds up to this day. Now, obviously, the ending, it's a little wacky. The way that they handle life and adaptation and machines, and the way that it's almost in a way that Terminator does it, right? But I love it. I love everything about it. It is definitely slow, especially for today's audience. But if you can just sit and experience it, especially when it comes to the sound design and the score, 2001: A Space Odyssey is a classic for a reason. Another classic is Star Wars, or as it's known today, A New Hope, the one that started it all, the OG. And you may look at my list and say, Austin, where's all the classics, man? Well, there will be some coming in my top 30 movies tomorrow. And I resonate with a lot of the classics, and I give them high scores and this and that, but a lot of these movies on my favorite list, they're going to be more films that I grew up with and films that I watch now and more modernized movies, and I know that's kind of ridiculous for some people, but that's just the way it is. But Star Wars, it just holds up. It straight up does it, and it does it right, and in the same vein of 2001, it handled these special effects, it handled these characters, it gave us one of the greatest villains of all time in Darth Vader. It handled it all perfectly. And while it's definitely a bit slower than you want and it doesn't get as many things right as Empire, it's phenomenal for a reason. I love the original Star Wars. I also love the second film in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now, the reason and I'm going to go ahead and spoil it, I leave Fellowship off of this list. It's very close. It's easily in my top 100, and they're all three phenomenal movies. But I wanted to make room for some other films. The reason why Two Towers somewhat eclipses Fellowship for me is just because it handles these big battles with such care, and it's just a more epic movie. And it does more epic things, and it holds more epic elements, and I keep using the word epic because that's what Lord of the Rings is for me. It's just an epic trilogy. I had this in my top 30 list for quite some time, recently moved it out, so obviously it's high up, but The Two Towers, I mean, this whole trilogy, come on. It's Lord of the Rings, y'all. Then we have Hereditary. Yes, Hereditary. Very recent movie, 2018. I just think it's the greatest horror movie I've ever seen. Like, I'm not a huge horror buff. You're not going to see any Halloweens or Friday the 13th or Chucky's or anything like that on this list. I love them. I love some of them. I love horror movies, right? But I'm not the biggest horror fan you'll ever see. I like the more artistic and the more A24-centric horror, obviously. And I'm not going to dive too deep into it because I know this may be a divisive movie. It got an F cinema score or like a D+ or something. But Hereditary speaks to me because it builds tension and intensity in such a way. And Toni Collette's performance to this day is one of the greatest performances I've ever seen. And crazy enough, as big of an A24 fan as I am, this is the only A24 movie on this list. Now, I had Uncut Gems in my honorable mentions, but I've still only seen that movie once. I'm waiting to see it again. When I see it again and I confirm how much I love it, I will put it in the honorable mentions. So be on the lookout on Letterboxd. But as of right now, Hereditary, I love it so much. Now we have two of the best action/fighting movies I have ever seen. Number one is Warrior, starring Tom Hardy and Joel Edgerton. If you have not seen Warrior, and it's not just, well, you have to be an MMA fan. You have to love the sport. It is a Gavin O'Connor classic at this point, and it does everything you want it to do for that genre. It's a perfect balance of emotion and this raw edge that you don't find in other movies nowadays. And I say all the way back. It was all the way back in 2011, and it just handled things with such care that I didn't expect. And no one really talked about it in terms of Oscars and this and that at the end of the year, and I think that's a travesty. Warrior is one of my favorite fight movies of all time, as is Creed. Creed is awesome. Ryan Coogler dominated directing this movie, and that's the reason why I love it so much. Michael B. Jordan is great, and I love the fact that it's a Rocky movie, but it has such a different vibe, a different feeling, a different tone to it that the other Rocky movies don't have, and I still love the original, and they're very close, and Rocky almost made this list, but once again, Creed is a movie that was more during my time, and it hits me, literally, nope. So Creed is awesome, as is Spirited Away. It is my favorite anime film of all time. Shout out to Your Name, which got very close to making this list. But Spirited Away just did something for me. It's this fantastical world that I've never even thought that I would encounter prior to this movie. And the visuals, the animation, if we're talking beautiful animation, and another movie we're going to talk about here in just a second comes close, but this has to be the most beautifully animated movie I've ever seen. And it's hard not to include this in the ones that I'm going to rank tomorrow. But if you've never seen Spirited Away, well, any of the movies like this, Howl's Moving Castle, and any anime film from that studio, any animated film that just resonates with people like this, you have to see Spirited Away. It is a must-watch, as is The Lion King. This one's easy. You know, grew up with The Lion King, 1994, watched it on VHS 1,000 times. They did the remake. It was a remake. The original Lion King is where it's at. I love the voice performances. I love the color. I love the animation. I took an animation class in college. What's the first movie we talked about? The first movie was Lion King, which is crazy to me. But we covered that film for weeks and weeks at a time, and there's just so much to it that you don't even think to notice on screen. The music is awesome. The story is, it's pretty simple if you think about it, but it's executed in such a way. The Lion King is phenomenal. Then, The Emperor's New Groove. That's right. The Emperor's New Groove, I believe, is one of the most underrated Disney movies of all time. And I'll talk about it a little bit more here in a future Disney Plus video. But I'm obsessed with this movie. I loved it as a kid. The guy turns into a llama. It's ridiculous. But David Spade and John Goodman's chemistry, the way that they go back and forth, the way that the story plays out, Yzma, Kronk, come on, guys. These are, no, not classic characters. Look, I grew up with this movie. This and The Lion King were on repeat for me, as well as The Iron Giant, a movie that resonated with me so much as a kid. This was the animated movie that, you know, I would watch, and I would get so emotional when I'd watch it because you have such a connection. This is kind of my E.T., and I love E.T. E.T.'s in the top 100 for me. But this was that for me. Vin Diesel, what he manages to do, and it's almost the same case as Groot, but what he manages to do, and then the emotion that you get from this connection between these two characters, it's such a simple animated movie, but it's come back to relevance as of late, and for a good reason. It's a story that I think transcends time. So The Iron Giant is phenomenal for me. And then the final movie, oh my goodness, we've talked for a long time, a lot of honorable mentions that we're talking about today, is Toy Story 3. Now, there is a Toy Story movie on my list tomorrow. Which one is it? Well, Toy Story 3 is on the list today. Got very close. This story is awesome. And in terms of quality, this may be the best quality Toy Story movie, especially the way that it plays out, especially the way that it gets dark and intense. And at the end, that third act, do I even have to say it, Andy, when he gives the toys away? It's so sad. I love it. Toy Story 3, one of my favorite Pixar movies of all time. And I can't believe that's the only Pixar movie on this list. This list, not tomorrow's list. So thank you guys so much. Oh my gosh, my voice. How am I going to do this next video? Well, we're going to do it. We're going to make it work. And I cannot wait tomorrow around noon to reveal to you guys my top movies of all time. So stay tuned. Hit that notification bell. Be sure to smash that thumbs up button. It helps this channel out. It helps this video out. And if you want to see more things like it, but I need your honorable mentions below. Don't give me your full lists just yet. Honorable mentions. I need the back and forth. I need the conversation. You guys are the best. I'll see you soon.